Yeah, they have.
But this lady
they
who
said
spoke today, she actually used her company and what they actually did with their risk assessment to give you an example of what it is you should be doing.
she was from another accounting
This is
firm.
a really bad
She was from another accounting firm.
KPMG. That's why you shouldn't have her talking for no half an hour. She need to be talking for at least an hour.
What I find,
because she had too much information.
Most of those risk assessments that companies do abroad, they have a template. That they use and just to guide them,
which is what the regulation.
Exactly. But the compliance commission was using somewhat of a template like a questionnaire because we had that, so we had filled that. It's like
they need to circulate a template.
Right? Now they don't want that no more. They want you to physically type up this document.
Yeah, but if this is something you never did before.
The rules as to how to risk.
Yeah, but if this isn't something you did before, you don't know exactly what you're looking for. So give me a guideline or a template. Okay, well then that's why y'all gotta get some. Y'all gotta make certain things up. You write the first time.
Yeah. So now I guess they decide now they're gonna put on some kind of workshop to do this, or they're gonna go whoever they send them back.
Well, you know they say look for throwing seminars. They like to throw a seminar. You was like seeing my friend with all of that. Your was doing
Okay, good evening all. We're there, almost there. I'm so happy to hear all of you so engaging with each other just now. I know y'all gonna miss it, y'all gonna wonder, what do I do next Wednesday? And the Wednesday after that, and the Wednesday after that.
I never wondered that from March 13th.
I would have been ready by myself. Yeah, you would have been here by yourself next week.
And so, here we are, at the finish line, just about. Yeah, God is good.
All the time.
People saying, worthy to be praised. We're going to go through question number 4. Then we will talk for just a couple of minutes, and then we will be out of here. I know today was extremely hot.
Yes, it
and,
is.
People, I just have to lose my time because the place I was in today, outside was 300 degrees, and inside there was minus 10.
You can very well say
You
that
was at
time,
Malia
because work is done.
Yeah.
You was at Malia as well,
Pardon?
You was at Malia as well,
No, I
because that's how we felt today too.
Okay.
Everything was...
In Malia?
Yes. What?
All of that money?
In here, it's cooler than how in there was. With all those people.
Malia?
Yes.
You had to find yourself and eat your food at the same time.
When a couple of us get together,
And there was
plenty of us.
They had too much people in there.
And then
They
part of the restaurant was outside, so there was no suppliers around.
Oh, I know they was hot.
Okay.
They were all fine.
They need to get them their money back.
Okay, here we are. And then there's something going on downtown. That's another mass shebang out there. So trying to come from that side, I have to go there on the market, go off and come around in the back of there.
You know,
is this the evening? Are they,
They're front for the governor.
that's what I was saying to her.
And then further down, I long go off one car broke down, they leave it right in the middle of the road. When I reached it, I saw that's what that was. So I know why was traffic coming from west to east speed. This
Exactly. It's opposite way around. That's why I cut it.
That's why I got the way.
Okay. Good evening.
Hey, Sarah.
Hello. Girls rule the galaxy, that's right.
Now this is, I need you to listen very attentively as our distinguished reader reads for the last time. Our designated reader reads for the last time. Can you give the read upon question, well, the one right up, that's for question 3 and 4, please?
did 3 last week.
Yes, yes. Just do the read them so we can get a background.
I reading the actual question or the nuggets?
You're gonna read the information on the question itself.
Okay. You are a compliance and risk professional with many years' experience as a practitioner and consultant in a sector of your choice. You are currently working for Every Firm International on a number of projects. EI is a large firm with an international client base regulated in your chosen sector. The projects you have been involved in have spanned a variety of business and assurance areas, and you have developed a good working relationship with a number of members of the executive team and senior management of the firm. The most recent project you have been asked to be involved in is to assist in the appointment of an interim head of compliance. The current holder of this position has unfortunately been taken ill recently, and it looks like she will be absent for some time. The timing of the situation is compounded by the fact that her long-serving deputy has recently left EI to join another firm. You are shortly to attend a meeting with the head of human resources and other key members of the senior management executive team to discuss plans for this appointment. In preparation for this meeting, you asked to be provided with existing material relating to recruitment, training, and ongoing support of staff in key roles. After some delay, this is made available to you and which you find causes you concern. So you speak directly with a senior member of the training and competence team and then with the HR team to clarify a number of points as they relate specifically to training and competence matters. As a consequence of this, your views on the current approach at EI can be summed up as follows. Staff vetting appears to have been a one-off exercise. EI has failed to identify changes that could affect an individual's integrity and suitability. EI limits enhanced vetting to certain roles only, and not all senior management roles are included in this process. Poor compliance records are not reflected in staff appraisals and remuneration. There also appear to be issues around the content, frequency, and record-keeping of staff training, particularly those who hold senior roles. For example, training material has not been consistently kept up to date, and there are no training logs or tracking of employees' training history. As a result of this, it appears that some staff are not, at the moment, demonstratively competent to carry out these roles. Overall, in your view, the current approach at EI to the recruitment, vetting, and training area appears inadequate.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
When we look at having read that and having listened to it, what would be your initial assessment of this company? I mean, just starting out, what would be your initial assessment of this company? Would you say that they are okay? Would you say that there's cause for concern? Would you say that there are matters of grave concern? Or would you say that they are already in regulatory trouble?
Regulatory trouble.
They're in serious trouble. They are in serious trouble. And I want to just share a couple of things with you. As I said, we won't be long this evening. The main thing I want to share with you is that you need to sum up, you need to analyze, you need to assess the state of affairs of this company. That's the first thing you need to do. Even before you start to write about it, you need to assess based on all that you know, from an anti-money laundering standpoint, from a GRC standpoint, you need to assess this company. That would help you to put it in a particular category in your mind. That's the first thing you need to do. Because once you would have assessed the company, you will be in a better position to determine the route you will take in writing about this company. You need to assess it first. You need to make up in your mind whether you think it's, because some people may read that same information and say, you know, it's okay. Or, yeah, they have some concerns, but it's not that bad. People have different perspectives on the same thing. Because what we need to do is to recognize that everyone makes his or her judgment based on that person's body of knowledge. If you're coming from a from a standpoint where you know better, you know compliance, you know AML. You can just read these things here and it will tell you right off that you're talking about some serious, serious risk. You're talking about some serious vulnerabilities in this company. And so what you want to do is to make up in your mind first, how do you deem this company? And that's why I asked you first. I notice I didn't give any response. The question is, how do you assess this company? That will determine whether you would give it a status of okay, some trouble, or serious trouble. Why is that important? Because if you think it's okay, you will be challenged to build a good case as to where to go from here. If you see it as being a company that has some challenges, but not so bad, you perhaps can write some things about it. The best scenario, and this is only my recommendation to you, the best scenario is if you haven't having used all that you know about compliance and what constitutes a good compliance program, what constitutes good risk management. If you determine that this company has some serious vulnerability, this company is in some serious trouble at this point, you are better poised to write something constructive. Remember now, you are making recommendation, you are talking to your seniors, you are in the best position to correct whatever you look at as being problematic. And so, to the extent of your view of this company, that will determine how you write. And so, I think that's the first thing we need to do. Let me, and we're going to take a slightly different approach today. Let me say to you, while you are writing, you must be mindful of several things. I'm going to pull from a couple of things that I would have said last week, but I'm going to make it more succinct this week. Those of you who would have been writing, thanks be to the advancement of technology. It is not like in the past when you had to write and you had to do word count one word, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 799, 799 or 997. And then you start to computers are word count, which means that you write a draft, you put your thoughts together, you put it in a draft form, rough form, you try to put some salient points together, and you jot it down, you type it up, and you start to see what your word count looks like. And I'm sure that most of you would have recognized by now that 2,500 words, that can't take you too far. You must be very, very careful. And so the recommendation is that you pull out some salient points. Remember I said last week, you're gonna have to build a story with every question. You cannot do that by pulling everything from the book. And so while some information may even sound very relative to the question at hand, you need to make a hard determination. Look at what is the best point I need to use to tell my story. That's really what you're doing. You're answering the question, but you're telling the story. Remember also, you're called upon to make recommendations. And so your recommendation, you may have 10 recommendations in draft. But when you look at it again, you may realize, you know what, there's some repetition in some of these, or some of these I can combine, some I can pull it all together, some I can use for the other question, all kinds of things going on. But my point is, you need to be very guarded in the way you use words. Let me also say, as a matter of caution, you want to be very, very careful of any direct quotation. Direct quotation. Let me share with you what you want to do is to make sure, write as though you are engaging senior management. You are engaging them respectfully, and you do differently when you're writing from when you're talking, but you are engaging, which means that I go back to my phrase, you need to tell a story. think about some persons who you would have sat in conferences and listened to in seminars and the like. Um, you can almost tell when somebody is speaking almost verbatim from a textbook. And while you may remember a couple of the points may jump out at you, you are more likely to remember the person who speaks in an engaging manner. The person who actually speaks in real everyday lingo, you remember that. Don't get me wrong, you're writing a professional paper, you're writing to professionals, but my point is, don't write like the textbook. Tell your story, tell it in your own words. You will get a whole lot more credit when you make points in your own word as opposed to extracting them from the book. And so tell your story. But before you tell your story, let's go back to step one. You need to determine what is your story. So if it is your story that this company here has serious vulnerabilities, it has serious risks, it has some deficiencies in terms of the way it has been doing some things, then you will write from that angle. And so let us look at the first point here. Now we go to the nuggets on 4. Remember that your question says to you, sorry, read question for us, please.
Question 4?
Yes, question.
Drawing on the content of the above scenario, produce a report for the executive team of EI that illustrates the
Sorry.
Huh?
Based on the scenario, produce a report. Produce a report. So they're basically telling you, based on what you would have read there, tell a story. That's really what a report is. A report is you're giving a summation of information that you either came by or you are aware of. So what you want to do is to make sure that you write a report. Think of it from the standpoint of a law enforcement officer, a police officer, or something like that. Anybody saw how police officers write? They write on the set, they're on the set, that and this thing and that thing and the next thing. They teach them how to write like that. They teach them how to write a report. And so they write a report based on what you had on that day, how you walk, how you look, and everything. Here you're being asked to write a report on the information that's given. And so what you do, you are making a summation of the information that you would have been given. And so that calls for you clearly, very carefully dissecting the information that's given to you. And so as we go back and forth with the information, the next thing is, go ahead please, you're reading.
That illustrates the role of recruitment, vetting.
Sorry. That illustrates, and we did this over the last 2 weeks, we want to do it again finally. That illustrates the role of several things. You need to be careful there that you do not combine them. When I say combine them, even if you, there will be perhaps some connectivity with these terms, but you ought to make sure that they are separate elements, because you can find information on all of these, and each of these here is a different point. And so you would illustrate the role of recruitment. And so when it comes to the role of recruitment, let us think first and foremost of what is recruitment. And so, some may want to go as far as going to defining the word recruitment, or you certainly want to put in your own words what recruitment is for the company. Now, you've been told that several things have happened here. The substantive holder of a position is off sick. The person who perhaps is the next in charge, the next most efficient person, or the next perhaps knowledgeable person left the company. And so what you need to do is to replace that person. And so by recruitment, it means that you need to engage in the process of hiring someone. Recruitment, you need to engage in the process of filling a position which was left vacant. That is critical because it goes back to the point that we mentioned last week when you're talking about recruitment. From a compliance standpoint, recruitment is the responsibility in most instances of your HR department. Which means that you are already being told that there is an assignment at hand which does not rest solely with you. There's an assignment at hand that immediately causes you to call upon the assistance of another department. So you see how much you can read, and you can read some other things into that. First and foremost, it doesn't rest with you. Because very seldom that you would find, unless it's the structure of a company demands it, but very seldom would you find the compliance department hiring somebody or taking on somebody. That's usually done through the HR department, hopefully with compliance at the table or having some involvement. Because first of all, it is compliance to say to HR what it is that they're looking for. All of this is a part of the recruitment process. First of all, the compliance function is saying to HR, we have a void left by somebody who has left the company. We have a void left by somebody who is off sick, and according to the information, is not going to be in place for some time. And so the function needs to be carried out. And so we need to bring somebody in. And so you are immediately engaging HR. You are immediately making your request through HR. And while you're doing that, you need to think of, then that takes you on a slightly different angle, whereby you would need to think of what it is you need to say to HR in terms of what you want. Remember now, this year is critical because if HR goes ahead and quote unquote recruits, brings in somebody, engages somebody, you will be the person to work with this one. You will be the person who perhaps will either benefit from the expertise, the capacity, the competency of this person, or the opposite will also be true. If you bring this person, if HR brings this person in and the person isn't suitably qualified, you have a problem starting out. In fact, your problem could be worse than it is at present because you need to bring somebody in who is suitable for the task. So you're engaging HR right away. That's just the recruitment side of it. You're talking about bringing in somebody. You also need to make sure that perhaps HR ought to be given information, given a clear guidance on the fact that this person is going to be coming in at a certain level. HR needs to know that this person needs to be properly compensated, which means you're talking about a number of things. You're talking about the person coming in at the right level, because if you bring somebody in who is too junior, that can pose some challenges for you. If you bring in somebody with unreasonable expectation, that can pose a challenge for you. And so the whole business of remuneration comes into the picture. The person has to be properly remunerated. The person has to have the right, quote unquote, salary and other package. Let's say you may want to, remember to, even though I am saying all of this, we're going to come back to this because obviously you cannot put all of this, but I'm just trying to share some things with you. You also need to think of the fact that HR needs to do a proper job in recruiting the right person, because you don't want to be going through this process over and over. having said that, that takes us to the next point of vetting. You would again depend heavily on HR to do a proper vetting process. When you talk about vetting, some of you may know of instances, or you may be the person who may have been involved in the process. When you're bringing in persons, particularly for a sensitive position, you need to know something about those people you're bringing in. You need to do background checks. I remember one time, and I had applied for something, and months later, my neighbor told me some persons came around, strange looking guys, um, asking about me, asking what time I get and what time I leave out, what type of people visit me, do I play loud music, do I do this, do they ever see me kick the dog, all kinds of stuff. And then, I was puzzled at first, and then I realized, okay, that was a part of a vetting process. And some people do that. Some people go to that extent. They check your neighbors, and they check your friends, and they check your friends, and all of that. Vetting is very, very critical, particularly if you're talking about somebody in the compliance role, in the MLRO role. Particularly, obviously, as an aside, certainly somebody who's going to have any level of influence. You need to know who you put in those positions. And so vetting is very, very critical.
And Mr. Thompson,
Yes.
our bank does that. Our bank does that a lot.
Okay.
Central Bank.
Uh-huh.
Before I signed my contract,
Mhm.
the PI was outside my gate.
Yes,
He called me though. I'm a PI. Give me
Yeah.
his name, and Central Bank sent him. But can we been all? I said, okay. He came all around the neighborhood.
Okay, okay.
He informed me what he was doing though.
That's
He
great.
gave
That's
me the
great.
heads up.
Okay. Most of them do not inform you.
Yeah, that's true.
Most of them do not inform you because, anyway, it's good to know that. It's good to know that you understand this whole vetting process. And why is that critical? That's critical. Once again, you are telling the story, and you need to determine the type of story you're telling. Um, you may want to tell the story from the standpoint that somebody is out sick. I can't fault anybody for being sick, but shortly thereafter, or to complicate the problem, the person who is that person's deputy left to go somewhere else. And so you can write it from a standpoint that you can imply very cautiously, imply that you really want to get somebody who is going to have some degree of, some level of tenure with you. You don't want to be going through this every month. And so you want to do a background on the person who may be a good prospect. Do they have any degree of commitment to did they express any degree of commitment to their previous employers? Sometimes, and let me qualify this first even before I say this, that there's nothing wrong with the point I'm going to make, but I've seen some resumes where people were 3 months over here, 2 months there, 6 months here. The longest they ever been anywhere is 8 months. And so, that's a person, don't get me wrong, and the person may be well qualified, and there may be a reason why that is. But if you're looking to replace somebody in a position like this, with the deputy having left to go somewhere else, you don't want to go through this process every day. And so vetting is very important. And vetting is also important because in addition to the HR being involved in this process, you may also want to engage legal in this process, because legal will tell you whether or not or how to go about this whole process of vetting. When you're talking about vetting, you're talking about you have to be very careful that you don't go too far left and start to stereotype and when you're recruiting, when you're vetting people, you have to be very careful that you do not offend either. Don't get me wrong, you have the latitude when you're recruiting somebody to stipulate what your wishes are, but you have to be very careful even in the way you write a job application, a job advertisement. You have to be very cautious there, which means that I've brought in a different element. You may want to, and you don't have to expand it, but you want to may want to make the point that as the person responsible for the recruitment and vetting process, you have engaged both HR and legal, and then training. Secondly,
checking qualifications too. Some people
most definitely.
say they have this degree from this
Believe
university.
me,
Harvard and-
I've seen so much of that. I've seen so much of that where persons falsify information. Of course, nobody will give a resume that says, I didn't pass that exam, or I went to school and I never completed. Everybody finished school. Everybody finished all the certifications. And nowadays too, you also want to be careful that nowadays there are so many computer-based qualification, and just want to check to make sure to check the authenticity of some of these purported qualifications. Very, very important. And imagine now you sitting through all of these hours, listening to all these people talk for hours, and then somebody forge the same kind of thing that you are. You just want to catch them and just slap them in the back of the head.
Yeah, on 60 Minutes a few years ago,
Yes.
they had somebody forge their degrees from Stanford, Harvard. It was like a couple of years back, right?
Okay.
And when they really checked, years later, they didn't go to the Ivy League schools.
Okay.
Was getting paid a salary.
It happens. It happens, and then too, a part of the process too, you have to remember too that some companies, even when they find these things out, they just allow the person to just go home quietly, because sometimes they're so embarrassed because it's an indictment on HR that they did not catch these things. Sometimes HR say, okay, go through the process, and this could be a clear case of something like this, where they say, okay, let's go through the process. We want to hurry fill this position. The person comes in and say, and some people, everybody can interview nice, everybody, because they put on their best behavior, they put on their best everything. And then you say, okay, in the interest of time, you can bring me copies of your, or the person may say, oh, I have copies of anything right here. They say, oh, you efficient, you brought your copies, okay. Yeah, we would want to see the originals at some point in time. And then even write a note that we need to see the originals, and next thing you know, they engage you, and you're working, and then 2 months pass, and 6 months pass, and a year pass, and they never bring the original until something comes up. Then they go back and they recognize that they never saw the originals. Those things happen, and I can tell you so many horror cases where persons actually do things like that. So in terms of vetting, you need to check a person's qualification. First of all, when we talk about vetting, let's go right back to KYC. You want to make sure that the person is who he or she purports to be. You have so many people now with, multiple identifications, and people assuming, identification that doesn't belong to them. But all kinds of things are going on. So the vetting process is very important. The next thing is training. Now training is slightly different. What you would want to do is to keep in mind that the recruitment and vetting, that takes care of the person. That takes care of the person, looking for a suitably qualified person to come in. And when you're talking about training, you can look at that from several angles. First of all, does the person have the requisite qualifications? And two, and this is even going to be even more critical, you're not just talking about a person who has qualification for him or herself, that the person has some capacity and has some history of actually facilitating training. Because if this person is going to be in a key role, you need to understand that this person understands the subject matter. It has been said that you cannot teach something that you do not know. And so if you are a senior person in compliance, you have to understand compliance sufficiently to hold sessions on compliance, or at least to look at it, remember that the compliance function is responsible for creating the training manual, which means that you ought to be fairly comfortable with the subject matter. And so we're talking about training activities that you want to pick somebody who has a record, a track record of, first of all, having been trained him or herself and able to train others. Now it says illustrate the role of recruitment, vetting, and training activities in supporting an effective compliance. Effective compliance. Key word there, effective. Remember now, this company has already demonstrated that it has serious deficiencies. And so what you want to do, you want to write this report from the angle that you need to bring in somebody who is going to help implement an effective compliance program. Notice I just said compliance program because there are two elements here. This here says compliance and risk. And so while they are related, you have to be very careful there that you're talking about somebody who is going to support an effective compliance program. Meaning that this person has to understand compliance well enough to make sure either help you put an effective program in place or at least manage, monitor the program in such a manner that it is effective. And then comes in the risk element. You want to make sure that the person you bring in understands this whole business of risk management. Risk culture. Obviously, having read all of you read about this company, it is easy to deduce from this that the culture of this company is not in line with an effective compliance culture or culture of good compliance, which means that the person coming in has to understand that he or she has some work to do in terms of even changing the culture. Now let's think about culture. When we think about culture, we know that culture, first of all, culture is something that occurs over a period of time. Every organization has a culture. Culture is actually built over a period of time. And for the most part, culture actually comes from the top. If you have a lax or lackadaisical or a non-compliance culture at the top, that permeates and comes straight down to the bottom. And so you're looking for somebody who understands the importance of having a risk culture. When you say risk culture, that is a person who is going to determine whether or not the company, what will be the level of the company's risk appetite. And so then a company has a risk appetite that says, okay, we don't mind taking on risky product, risky customers or whatever. Or conversely, if a company has a culture that we are risk averse, we don't like to take on risk, then the risk culture goes in line with what you look at as being the risk, the culture of the company in terms of whether or not how it views risk. It's obvious that what has actually allowed to fester in this company suggests that this company has little or no regard for proper risk management. And so you're talking about risk culture with the client. And then you need to do another thing. Having done that, then you also need to write from the angle that all that you're going to put in your report, you're going to write, you're going to make clear why the regulator is interested in this. Now, that may sound very different, but it is not. Because if you write your report in such a way that you are able to substantiate and clearly articulate the points you mentioned about, first and foremost, your recruitment process, if you write well about your vetting process, if you write well about your training initiatives, all of those will tie right back in to the obligation of the firm to the regulator. Put another way, this here all that you will write about, all that you need to think through about recruitment. That recruitment is important. That recruitment determines who you let in the door. That recruitment says, this is the kind of person we are looking for. That recruitment says, these are the qualifications we are looking for. That vetting says, we want to make sure that this person is ethical, the person, is the person that's suited for the job, and that the person is well trained. You want to make sure, tie all of that back in to the fact that this company needs to meet its regulatory obligation. Do you see where you can take all of that and pull it right back to make sense and to put it at the feet of the company meeting its regulatory obligation? Because once you write succinctly on the recruitment, vetting, and training, you are in a position to say whether or not these factors meet the regulatory requirement. And so what you then do, that same last phrase in that question changes the picture in such a way where it now puts the spotlight on who? The regulator. Which means that what you need to do, you need to put an element in your report that says that first and foremost, all of the weaknesses, material weaknesses, if you call it that, material weaknesses that you would have seen in this company, you want to put it from the standpoint that they would not have been acceptable to the regulator. And what you are proposing is you need to bring in somebody with the competency, commitment to turn that around so that this company will be able to operate in such a manner that it will meet its regulatory obligation, or the regulator will be pleased with the compliance / risk management program. Do you see how we brought that back around? And so let us pause there and think through that. Once again, you do not have the benefit of writing all day on that. And so what you need to do, having regard for all that I would have said, think through what is the story that I need to tell. And you really, really, really only need one good paragraph for this in all that I've said so far. The one paragraph, when I say one paragraph, I mean 2-line paragraph. When I say paragraph, not literally. But think through this. What you need to do is to write from a standpoint, think first. Think through the fact that you have identified some weaknesses in this company, and the person or persons to whom you would have liked to put these weaknesses at their feet, neither of them. One is out sick, the next one gone. And so you cannot have any regard for name calling or blame. You need to take corrective measures and bring in somebody who is going to address the weaknesses. And so all you need to do is to write the report from the standpoint that some weaknesses, quote unquote, material, or I'll put that in bracket because that will be your determination as to whether or not you deem them material. But some weaknesses were identified. I think all of us agree, obviously to different extent, but all of us agree that weaknesses were identified. And so what you need to do is to write your report from the standpoint that having identified some weaknesses, there is an urgent need to take corrective measures. one of the corrective measures is first and foremost to fill a vacancy and to put a suitable person in the position. Having mentioned the word suitable, it begs the question, what constitutes suitability? Then that will take you along the line of you will go about recruiting the right person. Remember, your paper told you that you are immediately, in fact, sorry, it says shortly you are about to engage HR, which means that even your paper points you in the direction of going to HR. So you are going to engage HR about the the possibility, not the possibility, the need to bring in a suitably qualified person. And so that brings into play the recruitment process. You may want to take the opportunity to talk about the importance of recruitment, why the recruitment process needs to be sound. And recruitment is important because that is the means by which somebody walks through the door, and you want to make sure that the right person is put in this place. You may want to mention the point that you are hard pressed to fill this job as quickly as possible. So, which means that your recruitment has to have tight timelines on it. This isn't something that you can say that, okay, we don't need to bother this right now. We need to do some other things and get back to this. No, you need to fill this position quickly because there is so much at risk. Find somewhere to put that in there that this is a position that ought not be vacant for a long period of time because it has serious implications. If you're writing from the local context, you may even see fit to just take a line and talk about the importance from the regulatory standpoint, the importance of ensuring that this position is always filled. Your compliance function, your compliance officer, that post should always be filled. And if by chance somebody walks away from that position, every effort ought to be made to fill that in the shortest possible time. And so, back to suitability, we talk about the importance of recruitment. You would also bring in the element of vetting, that it's important to make sure that you have the person with the ethical standards, always bringing that ethics and honesty and all that kind of stuff. You need an ethical person in there. Because even if the company in past did not have ethical standards, and nothing in here really suggests that, but what you want to do is you may even want to bring it up because you're talking about implementing an effective compliance and risk culture. You may want to say that you definitely want a strong, ethically sound person. So slip ethics in there. That's always important when you're talking about a suitable person. So vetting, you want to make sure that you do proper background, that you I don't know how far you want to take it, but that a person is suitably qualified and you have confirmed their qualification. Want to make sure that the person has no criminal history, that they are suited for the position in terms of the person's level of credibility, and that the person really has no history of any untoward behavior, not for this position. And then suitability also brings in the fact about a person's training capacity, that the person has been trained and that the person is in a position, if called upon, to train others. That's how solid the person needs to be when it comes to the compliance function for compliance obligation. So once again, you don't have the liberty of too much um, time there. When I say time, in terms of writing, all of that information, you don't have the liberty of just bringing in all aspects of the subject matter. So you're going to make it very, very pointed. You're going to talk about the suitability, first of all, the importance of filling this position, suitability of the person, and you're going to wrap it up with the fact that whatever you do will meet um, the approval of the regulators. Speaking of regulator, and this here is an aside, but you may want to give consideration to the fact that at some point in time, first of all, let me mention this. Don't write anything. Just hear me out on this point first. Anybody who I would think is moving into a position like this, head of compliance, I would think that that person would be very, very interested in looking at past evaluations or examinations on site, off site. That person would pick up the last few examinations of the firm to find out how that person fared in the last on-site examination or reviews. I would think that you may want to write from the standpoint that this company, in my view, there would have been some areas that the regulators may have even conveyed some concerns about, either verbally or in writing. Who could think that this company existed for a couple of years without something coming to the attention of the regulators? Either that, or you can then implicit in that would be that the regulators either did not come in here or did not do a proper job. Or best case scenario, you could say that this company um, is subject to a review zone and needs to ready itself for a review by the regulators. In any event, you're writing everything from the standpoint that this company needs to make sure that whoever it brings in, and whatever it does to um, upgrade or enhance its current compliant program, that it keeps in mind that it needs to meet the standards of the regulator. And so all of that deals with that first bullet. The next one is, the next bullet says that your report, remember you're writing a report, you're writing a story. It says it provides examples of good practice in respect of each of these activities. That everything that you wrote about, the recruitment process, the vetting process, the training process, that each of them speaks to good practice, meaning you're talking about putting something in place that is sound, something that can stand the test of time, something that actually puts the company in a realm where it is either mitigating or managing as many of these risks as possible. And it says the inspector of each of these explaining the benefits to the regulated fund. Obviously, we know that, well, and perhaps you want to write the story from the standpoint that when, not if, when you have the right person in the compliance function, the company stands to benefit. Now, you can write benefit from two different perspectives. You can write benefit from the standpoint that the company may be in a better position, or will be in a better position to attract more credible customers. because reputation does that for you. When you have a good reputation, you're able to attract reputable customers. The converse is also true. If your reputation is not good, you perhaps end up with persons who are undesirable, or persons who reputable companies do not want to do business with, and they know why they do not, because they're too risky. And so good practice says that you either will be in good stead for building the company in a positive way, or you can face the consequences of having a poorly regulated company, a company that operates very inefficiently. The compliance program is weak, the company is vulnerable, and the company is exposed to all types of risks. What you may want to do, I know some people love to write on risks. You can talk about reputational risks, regulatory risks, legal risks, all the different types of risks out there, and you don't have time to explore them. You just may want to mention that if you do not have good practices in place, it puts the company at risk. And a company that is at risk obviously will not be nearly as productive as others. And then the next point, it says, make specific recommendations. All this is one report. Make specific recommendations regarding the recruitment of the interim head of compliance and risk. Make specific recommendations. And so you see why you need to write this in draft first, so that you don't go tumbling over yourself. But you're going to write recommendation as to the recruitment of the person. And so all you're doing is you're writing to the executives, you're writing to senior management the course of action that ought to be taken and why. That's all you're doing. The course of action to be taken and why. You're writing recommendation on the recruitment of, or the engagement of the suitable person. You can take a couple angles to come to that point. You can come from the standpoint that you are recommending that, having regard for all the risk that is currently at play in this company, the only way to turn this around is to get the appropriate persons in the right place. And you look at this here, you're talking about the recruitment of the interim head of compliance. When you write about engaging this person, you're writing from the standpoint that it is hardly likely, or you are not banking on the person who went out sick coming back. It says that the person is going to be out, and the truth about it, if the person does come back, by that time you already have your program so strong and so effective that it becomes less of an issue. Put that another way, you're not sitting around waiting until the person comes back to address these weaknesses. You're going to build your compliance program. And so your recommendation says that you've identified weaknesses and you are steering. Remember, part of the compliance function, remember we talked about that 2 weeks ago, part of the role of the compliance officer is advisory. Anybody remember that? Advisory. You're giving advice upward. you are advising your seniors that this is the course of action we ought to take. Remember now, it is the senior person, it is the board that determines or that has, they hold the purse, right? So they're the ones who you are saying to, you're recommending, you are imploring them, you're saying, look here, we need to fill this position, we need to make the right choice, and you also need to say to them, or you need to make sure that they are aware that for a position as critical as this, you cannot be nickel and diming. That's why that goes back to the whole recruitment process, meaning your remuneration has to come into the picture. They have to be willing to spend the money today. I remember when I was at a different place and used to talk on this subject more often, I always had a phrase, pay now or pay more later. Pay the person the right money now, or pay in regulatory fine, pay in legal fine, pay in, or pay in once your reputation is gone. How much money can you pay to get your reputation back? There's hardly any amount of money that you, once your reputation is gone, that's it. And this company is on the brink of losing its reputation. And so you want to, right from the start, you want to recommend to your seniors that you want the most suitably qualified person, and that the remuneration has to be attractive enough. And you may want to even write this. It ought to be attractive enough for you to get somebody in who can rectify some of the misgivings already identified. Somebody who can come and turn this situation around. You remember in your reading of this text that it says, it said a couple of things to you. It said that there was some problem even at the senior level, that training either was not had or training was weak, and that the training material was weak. And so let me take you back to something we were talking about earlier. When we broke out the three words recruitment, vetting, and training, I talked for a couple of seconds on recruitment, then I talked about vetting, and then I talked about training. What I omitted at that point, which is very important, is that the biggest problem, one of the biggest problem identified, or certainly a problem that ought to jump out at you, is this company's approach to training. Remember, they started off by saying the person asked for what? The training manual. And so, which means that you would want to perhaps identify somebody who may have even been well versed in creating training manual. Or that you see why it's so important to have somebody in who understands the subject matter. And you may want to put in there that this person is able to develop and implement a sound training manual. So not just develop, but implement, because obviously, remember we read that when the person asked for the training manual, they said, there was a period of time in which they did not get it. They didn't get it right away. And then when they got it, they realized that it had some weaknesses, which means that perhaps it was already outdated. It certainly wasn't something that was in effect. And so one of the last bullet point I have under question 4 is taking us back to the beginning. You need to understand your intended audience. Very, very important. You need to understand who it is you're writing to. And think of some persons you know in executive positions. Think of some persons you may be, you are the person in executive management. Think of how you think. Think of what somebody will have to do to convince you. You're part of senior management. Think of who it is the report is going to. And as an aside from the things that I had mentioned earlier, when you are drafting your report, think of it from this standpoint, that it has to be something that is well read, that allows for easy reading. Think about the things that turn you off when you're reading a report, and those will be the things that you avoid. Think of what you look for in a report. Think of what you like in a report. I think most of us will agree that we love straightforward to the point points. You don't want to, nobody likes to read rambling on, and you have to sieve through to find the point that is being made. So, even at the risk of sounding repetitious, I want to say to you very firmly, think of the reader. You're writing to senior management, you're writing to executives, and think that executives, they really ain't into any long story. And so you have to hit them with some salient points, and very pointedly as possible. Let me ask, how many of you are at this point comfortable with question 4? You think it's okay? I think it's something that you can approach and be very successful with. Remember, I mentioned last week, perhaps the week before that, it's very important to remember that question 4 carries the heaviest weight of this whole assignment. And so you want to get this one right. You want to make sure that you do this right. You want to make sure that your response is as pointed as possible. You want to make sure that you tell the best story. And so that obviously you're going to do well on 1, 2, and 3. But when it comes to 4, you can basically write this in such a way that you just wow the person reading. And once again, when you're talking about how to write and what writing style, and each of us has a different writing style perhaps, what you may want to do is to think of what, and based on your own experience and your own level, you may think through what would you expect, or what would you call a good report? What elements would you want in a good report that's coming to you? Think of the turn-offs in a report, and those would be the things to stay away from. I believe you can do it. I believe each of you can do it. I believe you have sufficient information, and as I said last week, I will restate what you may want to do is to glance back in your information here, glance back in the AML information on the aspects of recruitment training. There's some vetting. Go back to the elements that deal with the individuals in the workplace. Look back at things that deal with KYE, know your employee, so that you can know of the things that's important to look for and expect of your employees, and the things that can get a company in trouble if they are not mindful of things that can go wrong with their employees. When I say things that can go wrong, certainly that there is a connection, a strong connection between the recruitment process and what happens, what materializes as things that can destroy a company. You would find invariably, almost every time that a company fails or a company has some misgivings, you can lay it at the feet of somebody in the company. I mean, think about it now. Companies don't have cultures of themselves. The culture of a company is really created and driven by the people in it. And so if you have dishonesty going on in the company, that came about as a result of dishonest people coming through the door. And who do you lay that at the feet at? You lay that at the feet at the recruitment process. And so write a story that says the compliance function, you understand. There's nobody in the compliance function. You know what needs to be done, and you know what you need in that person. And so you're writing to say, this is what we need, this is why we need it soon. These are the benefits of having the right person in the job. That's basically what you will be writing. Any questions or concerns? Let me say to each of you again that if you wish, I said this last week, and just one person sent something to me, but I only received something from one person. But let me say to you again, before you know it, independence is coming up, and all that kind of stuff, and you have to get carried away. Please write your paper before independence.
Please.
Don't wait until independence. You know that because you all want to go Clifford Park, you all want to see the flag rising and all that kind of stuff. Let me say to you, and I say this sincerely, please feel free, even if you have a draft tonight, send it to me and I'll give you my comments on it. I hope what I shared was of some benefit to you. Let me say this as an aside, and I'm happy that they're not recording me. I really wish next time to come in a little earlier, to get you off the ground a little earlier. Maybe when you have more energy to when you're going through. But seriously, I would love an opportunity to start you from the beginning, to start the course from the beginning, because I believe you. Don't get me wrong, and I have to be very careful here. I am not disparaging anything that occurred before I reached. My point is, you must get a proper foundation, and I believe it will take for you to agitate the institute, so you wouldn't be the ones to benefit from it. But I believe that this institute ought to try its best to agitate with the other folks in that other place that the course ought to be one continuous course without the long breaks. I believe a lot is lost because of those long breaks. But that being said, I came your way for 3 weeks. Thank you for, I don't think anybody fell asleep, but I didn't see anybody, unless you're good at sleeping with your eyes open. Thank you very much. All the best to you. Feel free to send me whatever you have, and I will give you my comments as quickly as possible. All the best to all of you.
Thank you.
Does everybody have my email, phone number?
Yes.
Email, phone number. I have WhatsApp and everything on there, message, everything on there. So, how you feel about it? Okay? That's good. Oh, simply thank you, all the best. Okay? How you feel about it?
Yeah.
Send me what you have. I mean, as soon as you have something that you're comfortable with, send it my way. Okay? Take care. Good to see you. Good to see you. Sing me. How you feel? You okay? As soon as I get it out, get back to you. Take care now.
Thomas, I sent you my stuff again,
I saw it.
Okay.
You didn't see that? I
I
responded to your email
I
just
was
this afternoon.
I started office.
Okay, I responded to it this afternoon.
AML seminar.
Okay.
That's
Who
what
was that?
AML seminar was today.
Okay, you want to tell me about that?
Yeah.
You know I love AML.
It was only one day.
One day, okay.
It's in the paper.
That's the one you're talking about at Malia?
Yeah, I
Oh,
saw
okay.
Brian today. Yeah.
Parking trail.
Okay, Brian hailed you?
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Of course. Because I did question 1 and 2, I'm working on question 3 and 4
I saw that.
simultaneously.
Yeah.
I will do 3 problems,
Mm-hmm.
4, the solution for that.
Mm-hmm.
The problem for 3,
Yeah.
solution for 4. I do it like that.
Certainly.
Problem, solution.
So AML will help us with this?
Yeah, but I believe, first of all, whatever information you can find, use it. My thing is, when you talk about things like recruitment and all that kind of thing, I believe AML, the
It's the
information
best.
AML is
Yeah.
clearer
Yeah.
than it
Yeah,
is in
it
GRC.
It is.
It is clearer and you can glean more from the AML. The
Right.
truth about it, I prefer the AML
Yeah,
material
yeah,
to
me
the
too.
GRC
Yeah.
material. It reads better
Easy to understand.
and certainly when you're talking about things like the obligation of the board and
Yeah.
staff
Yeah.
and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, that is
Yeah.
clearer in
Yeah.
AML than it is in GRC.
Even question 2 for the risk program.
Mhm.
Yeah,
AML.
You better
Please,
AML for
don't,
that?
yeah, don't go,
Yeah.
you're not gonna get too much. To me,
Okay. That's
the
we're
GRC,
talking about-
even the risk management section, is not as clear in GRC than it is in AML.
Okay.
Risk management is much clearer.
That's the only
in
one I
AML.
really ain't comfortable with, the risk
Yeah,
management
I
one.
think-
Go to the AML, go to the
Yeah.
AML material.
Yeah.
Revisit the AML material on risk management,
Uh-huh.
because you know the AML material has,
Yeah, they're on
it,
clear.
first of all, it approaches risk from so many different vantage points. Go back to the AML.
Okay, I can go back to AML.
I think.
Look at the index.
What's his name gave us
Yeah.
notes on that, Randy. Randy.
Taylor?
Oh,
Okay.
He has notes on that,
Okay.
but,
What you say about your information?
number 2,
Mm-hmm.
is it, I'm still trying to wrap my head around number 2.
Yeah, number 2
Is it that you choose like 2 types of risks and write a plan based on those, or is it just a general plan? See, that's what I can't get. When you say, write a risk management plan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You said therefore ask to design a risk management
So
process.
you gotta identify a risk. Okay. So you just identify like 1 or 2 risks and draft a plan based on those?
You can, but what you want to do first is you remember to now you're so confined with the amount of words that you don't
Right.
want to start something that you cannot flesh out properly.
See, that's my
You don't want to
problem.
start something if you cannot substantiate what you're saying.
Right.
You don't want to be hitting all about and not tell a story. Remember, this whole thing now is about telling the proper story. What you want to do is perhaps to say that the risk profile or the risk, the company is exposed to certain risks.
Right.
What you may want to do is you be very crafty and say the risk area that is of most concern either is and zoom in on one,
Okay.
or you may say the risk factors that could be devastating to this company. You mentioned 1 and 2 and zoom in on them.
That's what I'm trying to get.
Don't be
Right.
too broad. If
Right.
you go too broad, you
Right.
wouldn't have time to explain
So,
yourself
yeah,
properly.
that, right.
If you just zoom in on one,
Right.
it may sound too tight,
Uh-huh.
and to me you may confine yourself too much if
Right.
you just talk about, let's say you talk about just reputational risk.
Mhm.
Don't get me wrong, reputational risk is a big one.
It is
But what you may want to do, you may want to mention a couple of risks and just
and then just zoom in on
substantiate.
one. Right.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
like
yeah.
zoom in on the one that is most of most concern,
Certainly.
or that
Okay,
is
thank you.
cause the greatest impact.
Certainly.
Right.
And you have to
That's
be,
what I was trying to understand.
you have to be very careful now. Like I say, do not write on risks without going to AML. In fact, use AML
Right.
as the
You
basis
say
for
I'm
your risk.
right.
Use AML. And you can see that even with the AML, if you read through the types of risks, you may find one that you're more comfortable with,
Right.
or the one that you can tell the best story on. Are you a lawyer?
No, I work for Brown Thompson, but I was
Okay.
managing the accounts department now that they moved me to the right.
Okay, no, the reason why, and I appreciate
I'm
that.
just getting my feet wet. And guess what happened to me?
What is that?
The Compliance Commission
You
came
gotta
to
do-
go and do a review.
Yeah, on site. You
And
gotta
he
do
was
your
just
little
there,
leg.
on-site review, he was there to select his, the accounts. And guess what, when I looked at all their files, I keep asking them for the files, I said, give me the report from the last review, so I can see the difference.
Segment.
Let me stop. They wait till this week to give me the report. Give me the report on all the files.
Mm.
The risk assessment is boom, so I stuck with writing the risk assessment for the firm.
So you see now
That's
you
what I'm
have to-
working on right now.
So you see
I
now
was
you,
stuck with the policies and procedures manual. I had
now
to
you
do
see how
that. I
important
got
it
that
is
out
now.
the way.
You see how important it is now you have your material
Yeah,
on
cause
hand.
they're asking them for on-site before July 19.
Yes, that's
Yes, we gotta do ours too.
Wow, that ain't
But
much time.
luckily,
Yeah.
like I said, all of the stuff is
I
done.
mean, that's
But
what they
now I
told
work on
us.
the risk assessment.
You all have to do a
I
questionnaire.
could get it done by
You all have to do a questionnaire, so you do a survey.
when the
Yeah.
guy
And
actually
determine
comes
what
back
type
and
of risk
restarts.
Segment.
that your company
Segment.
is.
But you see how important, I mean, look how timely it is though, that you have access to all of this information. Suppose you didn't have this information here, you would have been in trouble. But so see, in writing on risk, go back to your AML material,
Right.
read the risks that you're most comfortable with. The reason why I asked you if you're a lawyer, you have some people who, when they read about legal risk, they can go to town on that. If you're a lawyer, you can think of all the, you know, then you're talking about, you know, all that
I
kind
was
of.
drafting that particular question from the standpoint of a law firm.
Okay, that's
And
great.
since
That's
I,
You're talking about question 3, you mean, question 3, problems here?
Number two,
Two,
we talk
two.
about.
Okay, cause I told them with the question 3,
Uh-huh.
I was like, look at all the problems that they have, right?
Mhm.
Identifying why the current approach is not acceptable,
Mhm.
and putting some risk in there. For
Yeah.
example, regulatory risk, you know.
Certainly,
Yeah.
certainly, certainly,
Okay,
certainly,
all right.
certainly.
So,
it's
for
free,
example,
you can
careful.
identify risk with
Yeah.
efficiency.
Be careful now. Yeah.
Because this training law, you know, the regulator wanna see training when they come in.
Yeah.
The
That's
manual, the training program,
Certainly.
so I was
Be-
putting like different risks.
Be careful now. Risk is so broad
Yeah.
and so important that you can have an element of risk
Right,
in each of these 4 questions.
right, okay.
So, but the one, when you're looking at 3, you can bring in a certain type of risk.
Yes.
But you're talking about the whole program. And you
Right.
obviously, any compliance program is based on risk, because you're talking about risk mitigation, you're talking about risk management. That's really what a compliance program is about.
Right.
But there's so many different types of risks and so many approaches to managing risk that you can put something in each one of these questions.
Okay.
Remember now, you have plenty material out there.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you can use the material, but make sure now you use it appropriately to tell the story you want to tell.
Right.
Don't just drop it in there. And I know you won't do that. Obviously.
Yes.
But my point is, make sure whatever you do, that when you talk about risk,
Right.
it fits in properly. Because first of all, when you talk about risk, you have to identify a problem first.
And that's why I see, depending on
Once-
question 3,
Once
that's
you
all the problems.
identify the problem,
Right.
and
And I
then
put like what the risk is for this particular problem.
certainly, but the
from 1
risk
to-
is,
yes.
and how you mitigate,
Yeah.
or how you
How you
bring,
prevent
let me
those
put it another way,
Right.
how you bring those risks to
Right.
the barest minimum
All right.
for occurring.
All right.
Because that's really that's what risk management is,
Right,
you know,
okay.
putting a program in place. But let's step back to what risk is. Risk is the likelihood
Right.
that something will happen
Right.
over which you have no
Okay.
control.
Another question: how I approaching is like have my issues here and the risk.
Mhm.
And question 4, where I'm going to be mitigating all the problems.
Mhm.
So I want to answer my recommendation. So you know,
Yes.
I'm mitigating question 4.
Secondly,
You see?
make sure though.
That don't be repetitive.
Secondly, make sure that I just about to say that. Make sure
Right.
now you're talking about the same people reading all of these things.
Yes.
And so what you want to do, you do not want to repeat
Right.
anything in the 4 questions, across the 4
right.
questions.
That's what I'm trying to
To me, you have sufficient information between your AML material and GRC that you can answer all 4 of these questions with new information. When I talk about that, I mean with new subject matters. You don't have to repeat anything. You have so much
Right.
information out there.
Yeah, that's
So
what I'm
make
gonna
sure that
approach it.
my point is, and I should have said this earlier, the point is, you are telling 4 different stories altogether.
Right.
1 is a distinct story by itself. 2, a distinct story by itself.
Right.
Where people, I believe, will be challenged is 3 and 4, where you're using the same material.
Right.
You have to be very careful that there's not too much repetition there. In fact, you ought to avoid any repetition,
Right.
because 1 is standalone, 2 is standalone,
Yeah.
3 and 4,
Together.
you have to be very crafty there in the way you approach those 2 questions, so that you tell stories that are very different, very solid by themselves, and they do not cross each other. And make sure, for God's sake, don't let them contradict each other either.
Right, yeah.
Make sure they're telling two different stories, but the stories are both standalone. They can stand on their own merit because you're giving good recommendation. You're making good points for 3, good recommendation, good points for 4.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, 3 is identifying the deficiencies.
Yeah, I didn't give recommendations for 3, you know.
Elaborating
So
why
we
they,
don't, yeah, that's.
My recommendation.
Hold on. So
Say it
he's
again,
saying-
sorry.
yeah,
Yeah, my number 3 is all the problems they have was not going well, and any risk based on these problems. My number 4 for me, I'm putting what to do right now, what how to correct these things. It's say leaving the recommendations for your
Okay.
question 4, not 3.
well,
Mm.
yeah, what to do, but you didn't know, before you need to write the process of what is involved in the process.
Okay,
yeah.
then to
so
get to it,
the recruitment,
right.
training and vetting.
It's acceptable by the regulator.
Later.
Yes,
Be
yes.
careful.
Yeah.
Work.
Be
and-
careful
Okay,
there,
hold on,
though. Be
see,
careful there. Be careful there.
Okay, you guys
What you
are-
said about 3, be careful. You cannot just identify the problems and leave it there, because if you're saying that something is not
You
acceptable,
have to say why.
you need to substantiate why
Substantiate
it's not
why.
acceptable.
Just
Don't get me wrong, don't go too far,
That's what
because
they say.
if you go too
Yeah,
far,
say
you will
why.
go over into 4.
Right.
That's why I say make sure that they're distinct.
Right.
Yeah.
But in
And
3,
why.
you're identifying
And then
the
say why
problems,
it's not
you're
good.
saying why it is
Right.
not acceptable.
Right.
In saying why it is not acceptable, implicit in that same thing is you're saying what it ought to be.
Okay.
That's really why you cannot say that something is not acceptable if you don't somehow say
Yeah.
Why?
what it ought to be.
Right,
Okay.
and you can't say it's not acceptable and leave it hanging. You
Yeah.
gotta-
Okay.
You gotta say, you gotta
Or
back
say,
it up.
let me
Make
put
a
it another
statement and
way.
back
If
it
you
up.
say what is unacceptable, you ought to say
Say
what is acceptable.
What makes it
Okay.
unacceptable.
Okay.
And what makes it and what is acceptable.
So you gotta
Okay.
address these
So that's the
issues
flip
and
side
you
of
gotta
it.
Yeah.
You're telling what the problem is, and you're also telling what it really ought to be.
Okay.
Because if you just
Yeah,
say it's
that's right.
unacceptable, if you just identify problems, that could leave it hanging.
Yeah. Hanging. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So you say what?
And then
So-
4, I go into more details about.
Certainly. And as Brian said just now, you're fleshing out your remedial action.
Okay.
Really, that's really what 4 is.
Yeah.
For
It's
you
like a
really come into
report.
remedial actions.
All
So
right.
it's like a report to the board. almost.
Certainly, certainly. Remember, 4 is remedial action. 4 is talking about how you turn this around. You turn it around by bringing in the right person. You turn it around by bringing in competent people.
Yes.
You're talking about bringing in people who can make the program, the compliance program, what it ought to
I
be.
before. I used to work in HR too.
Okay, that's
Doing
great,
everything.
that's great, that's great.
I used to work in HR for Atlanta, so then I had to do some HR here.
Uh-huh.
And then I have good rapport with HR here, my HR manager.
So you know about recruitment and vetting and all that process? Okay.
And,
And Atlantis, or,
I use
but I don't know how
Right,
it,
right, it's like, oh,
I don't know how it is now. I know Atlantis used to be rough when it comes to vetting.
yeah,
But they
that's what I was telling you.
check
because when I did it-
everything. They check everything.
When I did it, they go around your neighborhood and ask you about you.
Yeah,
They
they
go
do.
around your office and ask for the way you
Certainly,
work
certainly,
and
certainly.
ask about you.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yeah, so
she
kind of
told me
circles
that's what they
you,
do.
what kind of circles you run in, your
What
lifestyle,
kind of circle, who
everything.
you hang out and who
So
you
that's a
hang
good
with and
example.
stuff like that.
That's a good example to
Mhm.
say, well,
And all that they do,
Yeah.
and their recruit, and then a part of their recruitment thing is, you do this
Yeah.
question-based thing. You sit with a recruitment manager and they ask you a series of questions, and it's based on it's like personality and skill sets and technical skill
Oh,
sets
okay,
and stuff
okay.
like that.
And
And a lot of the questions
and what it should be.
were repetitive. It's just that
Okay.
they ask you in a different format.
Yeah, certainly. And they trying to,
So when they ask me all these questions, I'm like, but you just asked me the same thing.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
and I give them the same answer. So
Yeah.
I stop and say, what you gave me? I say, yeah, because these questions are repetitive. They only presented differently.
Yeah.
You say, okay, we finished with you.
Yeah.
And all
They want to see how alert you are too.
all the director of the director of compensation benefits, I met with them. So
Right.
you say,
And even number 4 says
can you do the
same
job?
thing.
I say, yeah. I said, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to do that. I said, only thing I can do is learn your system. He said, okay, good.
Hold on, okay.
That was it.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so with 3, right, it
Mhm.
says explain why the current approach to recruitment, vetting, and training of the senior staff,
Mm-hmm.
blah, 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 key roles are not acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
Number 4 goes on that, the same thing, illustrate
Mm-hmm.
the role of recruitment, vetting, and training activities.
Mm-hmm.
How do I not let those kind of Because if you,
One,
it's like,
one, you're
No.
focusing. 3,
hold
On
on,
the
you're really telling the story
Right.
about the deficiencies.
The
that's
deficiencies.
identified here.
You're
Right.
identifying the
Right.
deficiencies, and you're saying why the deficiencies left alone or left in its current state can land the company
Company
in
in
trouble.
problem.
That's really what 3 is
Could
about.
make them become non-compliant.
And that's what makes it unacceptable. It's unacceptable, you can write for the unacceptable, you can think about unacceptable from the standpoint of the regulator. You can think of unacceptable from the standpoint of the company itself, in that it can be exposed to the different
Yeah.
fines and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
So I won't be defining what's recruitment rather than training, that comes in.
That
four.
comes in the 4.
Okay, that's
You don't do that,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, okay,
It comes in 4.
so now I think I, so it's like this, gonna get
Mhm.
repetitive.
No, you have to
No,
be
it's
careful.
not.
That's why I say that
Mhm.
the challenge here, I believe the biggest challenge is differentiating 3 from 4.
Right.
See, probably what you do, look at 3, and just read it good and understand it, write it. Think about 4, write it, and then look at what you wrote. So then when you start to write 4, 3 will be your guide to 4, because when you start to write 4, you'll be like, no, I can't put this in that because that's 3, and that'll be, you'll be repeating what you said in 3.
Right.
So it'll push you to go beyond, thinking beyond what 3 is. You
Yeah.
see, it'll force you to think the right way. So just write 3 and concentrate on it and write what they want, and then look at it and then go on to 4. So when you start writing 4, it'll force you to think in the other direction.
I get
What they
good,
want
yeah.
you to do in
That's
4
good
What you
is
concept.
define,
define.
recruitment and
Define.
This is more from the HR, what should, this is as illustrated or.
Yeah,
it's from HR.
Yeah, so
What
what
it
it
things,
should
what are the
be.
Yeah.
pertinent things that you need to put in place when you hiring a person? What you need to look for, what you need to
Yeah.
do to get the right
This will be
person.
more
Right.
prescriptive for me saying this is what you need to have
Mhm,
in
mhm.
your program, in your
Yes.
HR program.
Sick.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, I just want to see when the picnic come and this paper go to yonder and I say, praise the Lord.
This day,
I
I'm not
love
gonna
it.
too fast.
How do you all feel about assignments versus a final exam?
Hmm?
How do you feel
I
about
prefer an exam.
assignment
I prefer
versus
an
a final
At
exam.
this point, if for GRC, I prefer the papers. I don't want to
Really?
I don't think I could write a final exam to GRC.
I believe it's easier to write a final exam on
Yeah.
AML.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
AML, yeah,
Yeah.
but not GRC. No, not GRC. Because the final exam in AML was not bad. We had a final.
No.
Yeah.
That was very fair. That was
Mhm.
Yeah.
that was straightforward.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
But I couldn't imagine writing no final exam for this. I don't look at the paper and say anybody.
To me, the
What is
material,
GRC?
I said it before, the GRC material writes very differently. It reads differently from the AML.
Yeah.
Even on some of the same subject matter, the way they write it. It's almost like they're trying to make it difficult. You ever read a book and like you can see the writer trying to make the book difficult.
But you know something? In doing research for some of these papers, I found the exact content
Mhm.
that's in that book
Same thing.
verbatim.
Yeah.
The charts
Mhm.
is a website with all those charts and they can
So you might should do the book.
I'm serious. I'm not
You might should
joking.
do the book.
And I was like, wait a minute. And I
You know you
found
saw
the book.
you saw
And I
that
was like,
somewhere before.
what the hell? You been telling me don't plagiarize. You telling me to plagiarize. And even one section, I can't remember what section it was, the whole section where they map out, I think it might have been to do with risk or whatever, verbatim in the textbook. Off one of those websites. And I only stumbled across that in researching for the paper.
And I'm gonna look at the AML.
I can look at your responses tomorrow when I go to work. So I'm saying that.
No, I didn't really go in depth
Okay.
because I've been in board meetings most of
Uh-huh.
the day. Today was crazy for me. I'll give you something between now and weekend.
Oh, okay, got you,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. But I was mainly acknowledging.
You
that
got it.
Yes.
Okay, that's good. You got it this time. Yeah.
Yes.
That's good. Okay. I gotta work on 3 and 4 though. That's my focus.
Yeah,
Just to make. I just don't want to repeat myself. I now
Yeah.
understand
yeah.
how to
Like I said to her,
differentiate.
and I said to all of you as a guy, make sure too that you don't make your responses too clinical at it sounds. So you don't want to write like a textbook. You want to
Right.
write like you're talking to somebody.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
So I kind of, I didn't write like a textbook for line 1, but page number 1 is almost like for my historical level.
Yeah, I mean,
Back then up to now, I ended up writing a bit too much, and I gotta find a way to reduce it. I hit the points with, would need to be there. I know I hit the point, because from when you went over, talked about question one in class last week, I saw here, I've done these, I say here, see here.
Okay.
Plus, at the seminar today, some of the seminar today, the points for number one was conveyed in some of those slides in the seminar.
You have the slides?
One of them, I didn't take pictures
Who
of
would have
all of them,
presented?
but
Who would have presented?
it was the one for,
Yeah.
it was from,
Local
it was
folks or-
actually
or-
from,
or-
no, they had local folks, it was from each one of them. They had local folks and,
So this one.
guest speakers.
Okay.
Each of their presentations were different on what they do, and
Yeah.
certain points that they had
Uh-huh.
in terms of the compliance, the compliance function were in their slides.
Okay.
Where the lady who talked about the Basel 1 and 2 and 3 and all that stuff, and where the banks had to redirect the way they managed it, and they talked about the dog, what the Frank dog.
Yeah, the
and all
dog,
that.
the dog, right?
That's it. Segment.
I was like, yes!
I just haven't I didn't include too much of the basil one, so I didn't go into too much depth. I did the,
And you-
but
yeah,
I
and
have to include basil, but I did the basil, the function of the banks. The compliance function of banks, I cited that a lot.
Okay.
Remember what you said, the presentation from Central Bank, when they said they had, where they beefed up, where they went out to do a more on-site examinations, and, something that she mentioned, I think it was, liquidity or something like that, that's part of number one, which changed it to bring it to today.
Well, which one?
Huh?
Because I kinda get my last week.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So that's what I'm saying.
yeah,
It's like 15.
and the information today, and for some of the presenters.
Who had the session today?
That was all of the regulators. And
Yeah, the GS.
But that was in the
GFSR.
international, that one that they had last year in September, they consider that an international conference. They had people from Bermuda, the Cayman Islands, and all those things. People from the US and all was in there.
Yeah.
Attended that one last year. This one was this year.
Yeah, last year.
But there was a presentation, the lady from Canada did a presentation on cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. And she showed us the Kickstarter's guy was Canadian, he was Bitcoin, and he was actually doing money laundering. But what he was doing, he was a drug dealer, but he used the purchase of weapons to get the money to be in the drug trade.
What?
Using Bitcoin and then using between cash and Canadian
Then
dollars.
Bitcoin is a serious thing.
And they have, and this company she works for, they built the software to manage and track transactions with Bitcoin.
Wow.
And that was amazing. That
Wow.
was amazing.
Yeah, that Bitcoin is a serious
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
That's the next, Thank you, Mr.
Take
Tom.
care.
Okay,
All the best to
we
you.
have lots of
Okay.
work to do.
Y'all can do it. Y'all can do it.
We obviously have no other choice.
Take care now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I'm
Okay,
here.
all the best,
taking
yeah?
some-
Good to see you. Take care. All the best to you now.
Taking and send